Welcome to Lessons in Sustainability from Kerala and Costa Rica. It's lovely to see you all. I'm Barbara Eckstein, President of the Johnson County United Nations Association, and we are the sponsors of this event this evening. Our speakers, Jim Olson and Jim Throgmorton, are also members of JCUNA. Here at the beginning of our program, JCUNA wants to acknowledge that we are here together now on land that was home to Indigenous peoples before it was home to us. We also want to acknowledge the continued presence of Indigenous people of several nations here in Johnson County. We hope that what we do here to promote sustainability honors all of them. I'm pleased now to introduce our moderator, Professor Lucy Lorien. Lucy Lorien is a professor in and director of the University of Iowa School of Planning and Public Affairs. She's the perfect moderator for tonight's program, designed to pull lessons in sustainability practices from the state of Kerala in India and the nation of Costa Rica. Her research focuses on the interactions of urban populations and their environments, including the effects of toxic sites in both France and the United States. She also has researched the effectiveness of sustainability plans in New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. Among other topics, she has examined, my personal favorite, the role of trust in the process of public planning. As I said, we're lucky to have her participation this evening.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I thought you were going to say time, because now I'm really interested in time. So we always think of sustainability in space, what is where it's on the land, how we manage our fields, our houses, right? But time is a factor we think about a bit less, right? How quickly we can change, how much urgency is there. So I'm interested in time as well as trust. I do have one connection with the UN, not much, but here it is. I interned at the United Nations in '94 in the summer at the Population Division in New York. And what I love the most is the door is open and you don't know what you're going to see, but it's going to be a beautiful sight. People in full garb from who knows what country in the world, and then you go to another floor and the elevator door open, it's somebody else from a different country, beautifully dressed with headpieces and interesting fabrics. So I love my experience in the UN. At the UN, I told my supervisor, I want to do cities, environment, people, water quality, air quality, waste management. How do I do this? And she said, in this country, it's called planning. So I found planning and studied at Chapel Hill after that. So the UN gave me the word planning and the concept of planning. So I'm very happy to be here. I've never been to India, but I've been to Costa Rica, so I'm looking forward to seeing pictures as well. I'll introduce first Jim Throgmorton. Jim Throgmorton is an emeritus professor in our school in Planning and Public Affairs. He is also a former council member and, of course, a former mayor of Iowa City. He has been promoting sustainability, I think, most of his life, if not all his life, for a long time. First, working on air pollution control, then in environmental consulting firms, and for a national energy research lab as well. And then he went into academia, a PhD first in academia, came to the University of Iowa, where he taught courses and wrote books and articles on environmental planning, sustainability, and different aspects of that. He's also known as a planning theorist. So when I joined the program, people would say, oh, you're at Iowa. That's Jim's school, right? And I said, yes, it's Jim's school. Well, he writes all the planning theory books and chapters I assign my students. So that's also what he is known for in our field, but maybe here what's more relevant is his work on environmental planning. He's been a resident in Iowa City since '86 and has contributed to many, many local government and non-governmental organizations. In particular, served as a council member in the late 90s to 95, 93 to 95, and then again 2012 to 19, that became mayor after that. So he has served 4 years as mayor, and as mayor, you probably have followed, it was in the news not too long ago, right? He has fostered a more inclusive, a more just, and more sustainable city here for us in Iowa City. And he tells the story of that effort in a book that he published recently called Co-Crafting the Just City, which I think if you read it will give you a sense of how much hard work goes into being a mayor, that we don't really see. We see the mayor's walk, we see the news, right? But it's a day in, day out, very hard work of relationship building, mainly to get things done. So thank you for having me, and thank you, Jim, for being here. I will pass it on to you, and you have 15 minutes. We'll keep the questions for the end, if that's okay.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks to all of you for coming. I'm going to talk about sustainable urban development in Kerala, India, and allude to what its implications for action in the Iowa City area might be. This is based on a U of I winter session course that I had an opportunity to participate in. It was taught by Dr. Jerry Anthony from the Urban Planning School, along with 2 professional assistants. And I was lucky to tag along with 22 students who were the primary focus of the course. I had to pay tuition, of course, to go, but it was really fun to do it. And the course itself lasted for about 18 days and focused on economic and urban development trends in Kerala, environmental implications of that development, and efforts to facilitate sustainable development. It focused specifically on 3 facets of sustainable development: low-cost housing, economic development, and ecotourism. In Trivandrum, which is the capital of Kerala, Kochi, which is the 2nd largest city in Kerala, and up in the Ghat Mountains. And it was conducted in close collaboration with 2 local entities, Cost Ford in Trivandrum and Inspiration Collective in Kochi. Here's some basic facts about Kerala if you don't know. So just imagine a map of India. It comes down in a funnel like this. And on the southwest tip is where the state of Kerala is located. It's one of 28 states and 7 territories in India. Kerala has about almost 35 million inhabitants. It's the 3rd most densely populated state in India, about 2,300 persons per square mile. Iowa City has about 2,900 persons per square mile, so you got to extend it over the entire state to see a connection. The 2 largest cities are Trivandrum, which has almost 1 million people, at a density of 12,000 persons per square mile, and Kochi, which has almost 700,000 people, and a density of 18,000 persons per square mile. That's 6 times more dense than Iowa City. It has diverse religions. 54% of the population is Hindu, 27% Muslim, 19% Christian. Malayalam, which it took me a long time to pronounce correctly, is the first language for 97% of the inhabitants of Kerala. Kerala itself has long been guided democratically by a leftist coalition, and it's known worldwide for success at deepening democracy. That's a term I'll come back to later on. Now, for a quick break, just to give you a teaser about some other photos I'm going to show you. This is a really serene moment that we experienced at the Katur Elephant Rehabilitation Center. And on the right side, you see tribal men, young tribal men, bathing elephants, young elephants. It was really wonderful to watch this happening. This long body of text here lays out a series of implications for Iowa City. I'm going to skip over this right now because Lucy is going to ask me a question about this in the Q&A. I just want you to know that I'm going to be covering a lot of implications as we get through this. We began by exploring Trivandrum on foot. So here you see a group of students, walking along. And it was really pretty amazing for me to see how congested the traffic was, pedestrians in the street, along with every other form of traffic you can imagine, all moving at a pretty high speed. Rubble and trash on the sidewalks. The sidewalks were all broken up, electricity lines dangling from poles, and so on. So that part of it didn't feel very good at all. But it was also clear that that was a consequence of construction that was taking place because the city's growing pretty rapidly. We attended 10 lectures at the Laurie Baker Center for Habitat Studies near Trivandrum. Here are 2 photographs showing the building on the left that we walked into for all of our classes, and then just another building on the campus. And they represent the kind of development that is being promoted by Costford. So here, this shows the setting for many of the lectures that we attended. The lectures focused on Dr. Laurie Baker's principles of sustainable design and construction and on Costford's projects in the city. Spent a lot of time in that room, and sometimes it got pretty warm and a little bit difficult to stick around with. We learned something about what they called the Laurie Baker way, and I'll just give you a teaser about this. You can make progress towards sustainability only if the public has priority over the private. And there's more I could say, but I want to move on through these slides. And anybody who wants to see these slides will be able to afterwards by looking online at JCUNA's session or website. One of our sessions focused on Kerala's model of development. So it focuses on human development and rejects the neoliberal grow or die mantra. You need to think globally and act locally and build on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. They were very clear about saying that. The biggest failure they have is an inability to retain highly educated youth who migrate to Persian Gulf countries and elsewhere, and then either return to Kerala or send money back. There were many other sessions covering diverse topics. I'll just mention a couple here. The history of the People's Planning Movement, which extended over a 30-year period and was designed to enable scientifically informed interaction with the people and led to the emergence of sustainable development. Another is the decentralization of power and funding to local governments after 1993 amendments to India's constitution. The effort involved inclusion, capacity building, and shifting more funds to actual needs and to poorer areas. Healthcare, Kerala is doing way better than the rest of India. They also focused a lot on the role of informal workers in the economy. An entity called Kudumbashri becomes really important when you're talking about Kerala, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. And we also covered slum rehabilitation, and I'll refer to that again in a minute. We learned about urban planning in Kerala, and I can say as an urban planner, I was really pretty much startled to see the urban planner talking about such things as transit-oriented development, transfer of development rights, sponge cities. It's kind of technocratic concepts, and they seem really wildly disconnected from my point of view about how it might work among the population of Kerala. We also explored the Katakata irrigation project, which was really another one of those serene moments we had, because as we were walking through this area, seeing an irrigation project, we encountered a large number of mainly women who had been working on the irrigation project, and they were mainly tribal people. And that exemplifies how the administration in Kerala is trying to deepen democracy and empower people at the lower level of society. We went to a place called Mitranikan, I'm mispronouncing that, learning about the home of friends. The man who talked to us in this place had been influenced by Gandhi. And so the building itself, which focuses on women, I don't mean building, at the facility itself, which focuses on women, youth, farmers, and tribal people. It promotes rural leadership. It runs a school for small children and tribal people, runs an informal community college, employs many rural women. It was really quite moving to be sitting there learning about this while seeing all these kinds of people moving around, going to their classes. At that same facility, we learned about micro-enterprises. For example, women making rope for satchels and mats out of coconut hair. Who knew? I had no idea that there was such a thing as coconut hair and that you could make rope out of it. We learned about Kudumbashri. It works in tandem with the local government and focuses on bottom-up women's empowerment and social and economic empowerment through, for example, micro-enterprises. We learned that politicians in Kerala will not go against Kudumbashri because half the households in Kerala are members of it. And I think I understand that. Here's a photo of Jerry on your left and me on your right, meeting with Mr. Mohan, president of the Kerala UN Association. It was really fun meeting him and talking with him at night over dinner. Here shows a couple images where we were visiting the Karamadam colony slum rehabilitation project. This is a big deal in Kerala. There are lots of slums, and they're trying to tear down the older slums, which we walked through, and build these newer structures, which were designed by Costa Rica, one of those firms, basically, that we learned about earlier. And so we're getting ready to walk through the slum rehabilitation project there. Here, we've already moved into one of the new buildings that have been constructed, and we had been guided around by a woman who comes out of the slum area. She used to live in the slums, but she's now become a prominent leader in that area. She's sitting with a smile, just where she is, right here. She was very pleased to be guiding us through the area, and we're sitting in a porch in her home in the new building that was constructed. Here we're being inspired by the director of Kantari International at a campus built by Costa Rica. I can't begin to tell you how inspiring this man was, and I don't have time to do it, but he had developed a disease that he had just learned was life-threatening, but he came out and he told us how important it is for him and us to commit ourselves to doing good work on important topics, but he expressed it in a much better way than I just did. We did some ecotourism up in the Ghat Mountains. So here we were going on a serene boat trip in the Periyar Tiger Preserve near Thekati, which is sort of in the upper, northeast part of Kerala. Here we have me, Jerry, and Alicia from Georgia Tech riding on an elephant named Minakashi. No, I'm mispronouncing it, I'm sorry. At Elephant Junction near Thekati. So the image on the left is the top head of an elephant. And I had no idea that elephants had hair. But Meenakshi definitely did. And what a treat it was to be trying to get on the back of an elephant, the legs spread apart like this. And then, so we're riding, the image on the right, the three of us are riding on the back of that elephant. And it was a pretty joyful experience for all the students and for the, people like me. We went to a place called the Spice Farm in Thekati and learned how 6 different types of spices are grown and used for medicinal purposes and in food in general. That was quite a treat. Here we're touring a facility up in the Ghat Mountains designed by Inspiration Collective. It's a place called Poetry Sarovar Eco Resort in the Western Ghats. So the resort hotel is on the left, and the view from the resort hotel out over the Ghat Mountains is on the right. It was really quite a stunning view and a gorgeous place. There we heard presentations by Inspiration's 2 co-founders, both of whom are friends of Jerry's. I don't want to read this text, but they went into some detail about the principles that guide them, showed us images of some of the facilities they built, including a hotel up high in the Himalaya mountains, and discussed water management and decentralized wastewater treatment projects. We went to another facility that they had designed and in part built for a private firm. It's called the Zandari Pearl Beach Resort near Kochi. It's kind of an upscale place, but it had a very strong sense of place, and it was really fun to walk through with the help from the manager, who's over here on in the left image. Here we see the owner of that resort and one of the co-founders of Inspiration Collective discussing the resort's planning, and they emphasized that projects should be ecologically sustainable, they should connect with the place, and they should have local community support. Moreover, visitors should feel that they're in a unique place rather than in just another hotel chain. The owner said, he explicitly said he did not seek to maximize the number of units on the site. Wow, from an American point of view, that is really out of the ordinary. And here's my next to last slide. This is a session about planning with the mayor of Kochi, a man named Anil Kumar. So the person second from the left is the mayor of Kochi. That's me sitting in the center, Jerry on my left, and then Jay Gopal, who's one of Inspiration Collective's co-founders, on the far side. We had a discussion about planning in Kochi. Jerry started by talking about planning in the U.S. I bookend that by talking about what things look like from a mayor's point of view, because the mayor of Kochi wanted to know what I thought. And then the other two, the mayor of Kochi and Jay Gopal from Inspiration Collective, focused on a particular master plan initiative that's underway in Kochi right now. So there you go. So this photo was taken from on top of a lighthouse on a beach facing the Arabian Sea. And I can tell you from my point of view, it was a great experience to put my foot in the warm waters of the Arabian Sea on New Year's Eve. And a couple nights later, too. It was really a treat, really good treat. So thank you, and after a while, we'll hear some questions. I'll turn things over to Jim.
Wow. Thank you. I think there's a story of pleasure as well as studies, right? I hear many different themes that hopefully we can think through together today, but we can have high quality of life and density, right? It doesn't have to be spread out to be high quality of life. We can have high quality of life and density and environmental protection. It can work, right? I heard a story of very strong foundations, the importance of foundations, that principle of good governance, the principles of sustainability comes first. Maybe the philosophy of enoughness with that hotel that did not maximize, not as in I've had enough, but we have enough, it's okay, we don't need more, right? And I think the strong foundation and the basis of our lives, water, soil, air quality, right? Preserving the environment. I also heard a lot of stories of balance in what you said between formal and informal sector. Obviously, the slums are now more formal than they were, but there's a strong informal economy as well, right? So having that balance. Public, private, nonprofit working together, balance between efficiency and beauty. There's a lot of mosaics and fine work, detail work in the architecture that you didn't mention, but I think it looked like bottles, glass bottles into windows, right? Work and fun, work and pleasure, right? That balance between the joy of being on that porch and also the hard work that came before that porch was even available, right? And then self-sufficiency and interdependencies. I think that there's a lot of richness in what you brought us tonight. So I'm looking forward to more conversations about that. All right, so now we'll have Jim Olson. Jim is a former vice president for the national programs of the United Nations Association of the USA and former UN representative for the Unitarian Universalist Association as well. So he has coordinated many programs to mobilize citizens to support the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, especially in Iowa City here. So he moved here in 2010, served as a volunteer leader for the Iowa UNA and UNA USA Johnson's County chapter. And in 2014, we had a consultation here in Iowa City to help shape the U.S. position on negotiations that led to the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. So that's a lot of hard work, I'm sure, that went into that. It's not easy for a country this size to join and agree on some sets of goals. So thank you for being here, Jim. And do you want to change the slides, or do you know, I don't know where your slides are?
He knows the plan.
You know
I
where
know
you have
the
to
plan, if I can remember the plan. There. So, good evening. Well, it's really a pleasure to be able to share some of my experience in Costa Rica, and I'm very happy to be on the program with the other Jim, with Jim Throgmorton. And Lucy, thank you so much for moderating our session tonight. I want to say that the remarks that I make tonight reflect our UNA chapter's work in educating the public about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, especially as those goals are implemented and advanced here in Iowa City. I found this photograph at the top of Costa Rica children holding little cards that show part of the each card has one of the Sustainable Development Goals. We passed out these cards at the beginning. If you haven't memorized the Sustainable Development Goals, well, this is a little card that can help you do that. I also want to start by making something of a disclaimer. I'm standing up here talking about sustainability in Costa Rica. I'm really not an expert in Costa Rica, and my knowledge of sustainability is fairly superficial, especially compared with the knowledge of Lucy and Jim. But I hope you'll bear with me. And I'm wondering, Lucy mentioned that she visited Costa Rica. I wonder if any of the rest of you have visited Costa Rica. Okay, lots of you have. Okay, so the rest of you are also experts, or you're just as much of an expert as I am. So if you hear something that really sounds like a howler, please correct me, or I did something, sorry. What did I do in my exuberance?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So anyway, I welcome comments, additions, corrections as we move through these slides. So many of you have been in Costa Rica. Here's a little cheat sheet on Costa Rica at a glance. It's a very small country, smaller than the state of West Virginia, much smaller than Kerala. The population is much smaller than Kerala. It is the oldest democracy in Latin America, the second oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere, second to the United States. Freedom House has given Costa Rica a rating of 91 out of 100, which is a good score, but not a perfect score, because in Costa Rica there are still forms of discrimination and there are inequalities that still need to be addressed. Famously, Costa Rica has no army. Has not had an army since the 1940s. Well, how does that work when they don't have an army? Well, actually, they're in an alliance, a regional alliance with the United States, in which the United States is one member. The 1948 Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, better known as the Rio Treaty. If Costa Rica should happen to be invaded or attacked, the United States will come to its aid. They don't have an army, but they have plenty of police. There's a national police force, and police are very much in evidence. There are all kinds of statistics on the quality of life in Costa Rica. All of them are very impressive, a 98% literacy rate. Education, primary and secondary education is free and compulsory. An 84% vaccination rate on COVID. I asked, what is the vaccination rate? And they looked at me blankly like, well, they didn't really think in those terms because most everybody had a vaccination. They actually said healthcare workers around door to door to administer shots to people. But all these features of Costa Rica so far are quite wonderful, but there is a disturbing undertone. There is growing inequality. 20% of the population live in poverty. There is popular distrust of elites and, ironically, ambivalence about democracy. And I got that information from a report issued by the Bertelsmann Stiftung in Germany, the Bertelsmann Foundation, which has analyzed political culture in Costa Rica and come to that conclusion. Now, remember that last thought because I'm going to return to it later. So, took part in a hike called the El Camino de Costa Rica. It's a hiking route that was developed about 4 or 5 years ago and very much a rural development project. And this is what attracted me to it, actually. This is an effort to bring tourist dollars into parts of Costa Rica where the tourists don't often go. Most of the tourists, and there are lots of them, are clustered on the Pacific side, and so people living along this trail have been encouraged to fix up their homes and to open their homes as place to stay for the hikers. And the man who organized our tour, our trip, gave us little pep talks about the great service we were doing to these people in rural Costa Rica. We were bringing income to them and bettering their lives in that way. Here's the route. We walked from the Caribbean in Limon province and walked southeast. We walked south of the capital city of San Jose down to the former fishing village and now sort of a fishing village / tourist town of Quepos on the Pacific. So we walked 174 miles over 13 days. We crossed 2 mountain ranges. The highest point was 7,600 feet. We walked in the coastal plain. We walked in jungles. We walked over these 2 mountain ranges. And on the left is me at the Caribbean side, standing in the Caribbean. And there in the middle is me trudging along. That's on the 4th day, walking through a jungle in a territory that was occupied by indigenous people. And then on the right, I'm sticking my hands into the Pacific 13 days later, happy to be there. The middle picture is a little misleading. The hike was not always that rigorous. Most of the trail is gravel roads or dirt paths, even some pavement. That particular day walking through the jungle was probably the most strenuous. The group that we worked with consisted of 6 people who walked or attempted to walk the whole way, plus 3 other people who joined us for a day or 2. You can actually choose to hike part of the trail. You don't have to hike the whole thing. It was an international group, 2 Germans, 2 Canadians, 1 Swiss, and 4 Americans, 3 women, 6 men. It was a mature group, people in their 50s, 60s, and at 79, I was the oldest hiker. I may actually be the oldest person ever to make the hike. No, I'm very blessed to be able to still walk. So, we walked through lots of agricultural territory. We walked through banana plantations, pineapple plantations, sugarcane plantations, coffee plantations, palm oil plantations, a lot of areas devoted to agriculture. But the fact is that half of Costa Rica is forest. Half of the, by design and by very rigorous, ambitious government policy, Costa Rica has embarked on a program of reforestation, and now over 50% of the land is forest. We were shown this chart by an environmental leader, and if you look at this, it shows that in the 1940s, 75% of the land in Costa Rica was forest. You can see that the forests were cut down. By 1987, only 21%. And then in the 80s, there was a complete shift of policy. There was a recognition that Costa Rica was well on the path to becoming like Haiti, totally deforested. And so since the since the 1980s why the forests have been restored, and now they're over 50%. Well, how was that done? I mean, that's amazing to think that there was that kind of transformation. It was done largely by payments made to farmers. Farmers were given payments by the government to reforest and to use their land in a responsible way. 18,000 farm families received these payments. They planted 7 million trees. You may ask, well, where did the money come from to make these payments? The answer is from a tax on fossil fuels. So, and what was the motivation? Well, part of the motivation was to keep attracting tourists. Tourists from abroad are a great source of income and very important to the economy. The tourists come to see the lush landscape and the birds and the animals, and if the landscape and the birds and the animals disappear, then so were the tourists. So there was a very practical dimension to this. Related to this great commitment to reforestation, we also heard a lot about protecting biodiversity. Costa Ricans are very proud of the fact that Costa Rica is the home to 1.5 million plant and animal species. 6% of the world's biodiversity is located in Costa Rica. Now, the tale is told of this creature, the golden toad. We went to, after the hike, we went and visited a nature preserve in Monteverde up in the cloud forest, and we heard the story of the golden toad. The golden toad was a very rare species of toad that lived in a very small ecosystem in that nature preserve. It was only discovered about in the 1960s, and by the 1990s, it had gone extinct. And why did that happen? Well, the most popular explanation for the extinction of the golden toad is climate change, that the cloud forest environment there dried up just enough to make it inhospitable for the golden toad. The golden toad is sort of like the poster child of how biodiversity is threatened by climate change. In the nature preserve, there's a sign. You can't read the sign, but it was in Spanish and English, and it says something like, if you had stood here 20 years ago, you would have heard the golden toad, but now you don't, because the golden toad is extinct. And all over Costa Rica, and I'm not a Spanish speaker, so in a way I was sort of impervious to what was going on around me, but even so, even as an English speaker, I couldn't help but notice that there were lots of references and references to environmentalism, calls on people to be environmentally responsible. For example, in many businesses, there are signs on the window that have this logo. And that means that the business subscribes to certain environmental principles. And so it's a way of encouraging businesses to do the right thing and then to make that known to the public. Or you see people wearing these T-shirts or see other signs and expressions of this phrase, Pura Vida, which is a greeting. It's something you say when you greet people, but also when you say goodbye. It's pure life. And it reflects a cultural value in Costa Rica, living at peace with yourself and living at peace with the environment in which you live. Here's another way in which an environmental lesson, environmental awareness is promoted. We went to a small store to get some snacks, and there was a misunderstanding at the cash register, and the cashier thought that we wanted a disposable bag. So he brought out this, here it is actually, this disposable bag, and we had to pay the equivalent of 60 cents for the bag, and it's made out of something. You can come up and feel it. I don't know exactly what it is, but you can come up and feel it. Apparently it's not plastic, but it's, it says no more single-use plastic bags. And, I was just hearing today about Target and Walmart and so forth have new policies about plastic and paper bags depending on where you live. So this is an ongoing discussion and debate in the United States, but in Costa Rica, there's no discussion. If you want a single-use bag, you pay for it, and it's not plastic. We were walking along one evening, and just on the side of the road was this sign. We should respect nature. These are the kind of messages that Costa Ricans are exposed to constantly. Also in school, where there's a very strong environmental curriculum. Also in the national parks of Costa Rica, which are quite numerous and quite heavily traveled, both by Costa Ricans themselves and by foreign tourists. So I want to shift gears, actually, and I'd be happy to answer more questions about the hike itself, but I wanted to say something about Costa Rica on the world stage, especially as it applies to one of the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 13, climate action. So you probably are not surprised to hear, you may know, that Costa Rica has been and still is a leader in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially, but not only, but especially in the area of climate action. This woman is a Costa Rican her name is Cristina Figueres. She served as the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change from 2010 until 2016. She probably did more than anyone, I don't know if this is true exactly, but she did a lot to make possible the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. She is one of the great heroes of the international climate campaign. Costa Rica itself came to the 2015 conference with very ambitious pledges. They said, for example, that they would have 100% generation of electrical power from renewable sources by 2030. They would expand their reforested land to 60% by 2030. I should point out that most of the electrical power in Costa Rica now is generated from renewable sources, especially hydroelectric. So Costa Rica was sort of high, wide, and handsome at COP21 and also at a subsequent UN conference in 2021, COP26 in 2021. Very, very, very prominent. Costa Rica was like recognized and hailed as this leader in international climate work. Costa Rica was one of the first recipients of the Earthshot Prize. The Earthshot Prize was initiated by Prince William of the UK, and there were other recipients as well, but the first Earthshot Prizes were awarded in 2021, and Costa Rica received it primarily for that work in reforestation. Costa Rica joined with Denmark to establish the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which has as its goal the phasing out of the use of oil and gas. Very, very ambitious. And Costa Rica was a leader in putting together an international agreement in Central America for the protection of the environment on the coastlines. The president of Costa Rica who led in this work is pictured there, Carlos Alvarado. Carlos Alvarado was known as an eco-warrior. He was sort of the boy wonder of Costa Rican politics. He became president when he was in his late 30s, educated in the United States, a very prominent and articulate leader. But then, something interesting happened last year. Last year, there was a presidential election, and this gentleman, Rodrigo Chavez Robles, was elected president, and he has sort of put on the brakes. He has taken some steps that might be considered a pause or backward steps even in Costa Rica's commitment to climate and environment. He ran as a political outsider. He really wasn't a political outsider. He had been the finance minister in the previous government. But he was a populist, and he claimed to speak for the people who, that 20% unemployed, people who were kind of dissatisfied with what was going on. He attacked his opponents and other government elites as corrupt. He said that the press was, he had some very language that I don't usually use in public, so I won't, to describe leaders of the press. The press had pointed out that there were campaign finance irregularities and suspicion of sexual harassment in the case of Chavez Robles. And he shot back and said, he didn't say fake news, but he said, these people are basically not to be believed. He said famously that Costa Rica is open for business, that, let's not scare off business with his commitment to environmentalism. He even suggested it might be okay to resume exploration for oil and gas. And he pulled the plug, and that's a very apt metaphor. He pulled the plug on a plan for a light railway system between Costa Rican cities, which, from my experience, it sounds like a great idea. Some of the roads in Costa Rica are pretty treacherous, some major league potholes and so forth. So a light rail sounds like a pretty good idea, but that idea was put on the back burner. And the Costa Rica legislature failed to ratify an environmental treaty that bound together many Central American countries. The president said, well, we've got enough environmental laws already. We don't need a treaty. So that was the end of that. I also have some slides on lessons learned, and I'm going to follow Jim's example and save those slides for the questions and answers. I'll give you a little hint though, I found it very difficult to think about lessons that we could borrow from Costa Rica and practice here in Iowa City, but more about that later. So thank you. Look forward to your questions, comments, and look forward to dialogue with Jim and Lucy and all of you. Thank you.
I can think of bringing back the prairie, the way Costa Rica is bringing back the forest. No?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be lovely? Do you want to turn on some lights or come here? Maybe nice.
Can you go back to my presentation?
Yes.
So maybe rather than ask, we don't have a lot of time left, maybe rather than ask about connections to the goals themselves, maybe implications for Iowa City or region, I think that would be really interesting to hear about, right? For a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to do it
Want me to
first?
do this?
Yeah, yeah.
But you need to sit here.
We can be here, we can be
I
around
need to
there.
be able to see the text.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then Jim and Lucy can sit.
We'll sit. We'll sit.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to make it fill up the whole screen, but maybe we don't need to do that.
Don't-
You want to be here?
Let's not worry about that.
Okay.
This way, Jim.
Yeah, what,
If you want to make it larger, you want to push that little button.
that little button there. I-
Up a little bit,
Up a little bit,
left,
left.
There.
a bit more, left a bit more, yep, left again. There, yep. There you go. Oh, and then go on the black zone anywhere.
I don't know what to do with that. Yeah, I don't have my glasses on, I can't really see this.
Just go.
Let's get rid of that
Yeah,
anyway.
get rid of that, please.
All right.
All right.
Sorry, I think y'all can see this. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think of these really more as provocative observations rather than implications for the same reason you articulated about the difficulty of trying to figure out what the direct implications are. So the first is, obviously, Kerala is much larger, much more dense, and much more diverse than Iowa. And unlike Iowa, it was only marginally affected by settler colonization. I don't know if that's a familiar term to you or not, but that has huge implications for the natural landscape and ability to restore it and many other things like that. Secondly, much of Kerala is quite beautiful, serene even. There were like 4 or 5 moments when I was just, I was just overwhelmed by the serenity of the situation. And that attracts ecotourists. So how much ecotourism do we do in Iowa? Yeah, none, as far as I know, or maybe on the far west. Kerala's efforts to deepen democracy, to focus on human development, and to empower women and lower income people go far beyond what Iowa and Iowa City do. Far beyond. Third, remember Cost Ford? It's one of the 2 sort of companies that we dealt with. They've built 35,000 buildings over the last few decades. And it's just one entity. And there are, some of them are large buildings, like the first image that was up on the screen, and some of them are much smaller, and a resort hotel and so on. 35,000 buildings. So Cost Ford's and Inspiration Collective's success in designing and building a very large number of beautiful and sustainable buildings is really impressive. And again, I think quite different from what we see in the US, or in the Iowa City area even. Next item, Trivandrum's problem with traffic congestion, trash, rubble, poor sidewalks, and dangling electricity wires is far worse than Iowa City's. We don't have any of that, thankfully. Trivandrum's rapid growth is the primary reason for that. And Kochi's growing rapidly as well. And Mayor Anil Kumar said during our panel session, if this is permitted to continue, it's going to destroy Kochi. So he clearly does not want that to happen. All right, the last 2 items. The technocratic focus of Kerala's urban planners challenges the state's efforts to deepen democracy. What I mean by that is, just imagine tribal people or lower income people who are just trying to live their lives being told about transfer of development rights and what's the other term I used? Transit-oriented development. These are really very technocratic terms, so there's got to be, it's just a challenge for them, and I asked questions about it in terms of how they were dealing with the challenge. And they responded quite confidently, but still, it's a challenge. And last, the sustainable development efforts of Kerala's leftist coalition clash sharply with the neoliberal/Hindu nationalist policies of the Modi regime. But it's a federalist country, or it's structured in a federalist process, structure, so that you have a national government, but the states have a considerable amount of freedom and flexibility in dealing with the situations they experience in their cities. Still, there's tension between the two, and the tension is evident. So a lot of this resonates with what we're experiencing in Iowa and in Iowa City's relationship to the state of Iowa and so on. But still, I think there are provocative, what's the term I use? Provocative, yeah, I don't know. Provocative implications or provocative questions associated with each of these elements. Maybe I'll stop there. Jim, you want to pick up and say something, or we could have some questions about this?
Well, maybe we should go to Jim's slides.
Let's hear it from you, Jim, and then we can open it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll see out of your way.
I may have lost my slideshow.
Oh, you did.
That's Firefox, that's not what you.
That's not what I want. Oh, say hello.
It might be here, if in the files. Go to the folder. That's Kerala. Is your,
That's Jim's, the other Jim.
they're both. Is it on the desktop? I'm not
No,
sure. I don't know where it is.
I don't. Thank you.
I don't know where the other file was.
It is.
On the desktop.
Yeah, I think it closed though. Which one was yours?
It's,
Oh, this one, right?
No, not
No.
Kerala. The other.
no, it's not. That's the one it's not. It's,
Oh, right. Desktop.
Probably in the downloads. If you don't.
Let's see. Is this?
That's the one.
Yep.
Okay, sorry,
go.
sorry.
All right.
So, I was really challenged by the idea of what lessons. And so I came up with some sort of general lessons, and these aren't too original. I mean, I think these are things that we know already. And I think there's some echoes or resonances with what Jim said. Sustainability and progress toward sustainable development is very much linked with cultural values and, there's a typo there, and healthy democracy. In the case of Costa Rica, this very impressive 180 on addressing deforestation by reforesting. I mean, that was huge, and it actually reflected both a cultural value and also an economic imperative. And so the Costa Ricans' respect for nature, their respect for nature helped to provide the backing, the support for policies taken by the government. And there was healthy democracy, which further mobilized support for those policies. Elections have consequences. The environmental climate policies enacted by the government of Costa Rica were led by very bold, far-sighted, public-spirited political leaders who were elected to office. And so who is sort of an obvious thing, but who you elect really, really matters. That's certainly true in the example of Costa Rica. And sustainability is impacted by globalization, especially in Costa Rica, where Costa Rica does not exist as an island. It is not economically self-sufficient. There are immigration pressures especially from the north, from the northern neighbor of Nicaragua. Costa Rica may have a high unemployment rate, but it's much higher in Nicaragua. And Nicaraguans come down into Costa Rica to harvest the coffee. Sort of interesting to me that there's high unemployment in Costa Rica, but the Costa Ricans don't want to harvest the coffee. So the Nicaraguans and indigenous people from Panama come to harvest the coffee. Well, there's that pressure from the north. There are Venezuelans who are on their way up toward the United States who come through Costa Rica. So sustainability, that's one international factor that impacts sustainability. Costa Rica depends on international trade, the export of electronic components, agricultural products like coffee, especially coffee, but not only coffee. The revenue brought in by international tourists. So whether sustainability is strong and continues in Costa Rica is very much contingent on the international economic environment in which the country lives. And then sustainability is impacted by the global pandemic. Costa Rica was hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of the dissatisfaction that may now prevail in Costa Rican political life was a result of the pandemic. And so this is a pandemic that came from abroad, and so Costa Rica and other countries, all of us are vulnerable to these these viruses that cross national borders very easily. So those are three kind of general lessons. And then I tried to think about, well, what did I see in Costa Rica that might have some bearing on our lives as communities and individuals? And so the example of the plastic bag is one. The diet of rural Costa Ricans seems to be very environmentally friendly. Costa Ricans eat rice and beans for every meal. Costa Rica runs on rice and beans, and rice and beans are the kind of the centerpiece, and then other things are added to that. Very little meat, very little red meat. I think that's probably true, especially in rural Costa Rica, not so much in the cities. There are 54 McDonald's in Costa Rica. 52 of them are in San Jose, or San Jose neighborhood. So I think that's where, those cities are sort of corrupted by the sort of first world consumption patterns. But in rural Costa Rica, the diet seems to be simpler, more plant-based, lots of fruit like you've never heard of, or I had never heard of before. Many of us are already committed to simplifying our diets, and could we continue to do that? Building public awareness, the signs, the branding, the constant reminders about environmental issues and climate issues, very evident in Costa Rica. I think a lot of that is already done in Iowa City, and I take my hat off to the city of Iowa City and other municipalities and others, non-governmental bodies, activist groups, grannies, others who are doing their wonderful work and building this awareness, and we can always do more. So those are some general points. As I said, I find it hard to, because of the difference in our two countries, hard to say they do that, we should do it here.
Thank you. I can think of nonprofits building lots of houses, like Habitat for Humanity or Homes for Iowa, like on a large scale.
So can I get you folks to use microphones?
Oh, sure.
I'm afraid that none of this is being recorded.
Sorry.
Keep stepping away from the microphone.
You mentioned a large-scale housing construction. Maybe big nonprofits like Habitat can do that on a grand scale. Reforesting for us, maybe going back to more prairie. And I think you can live your life in Iowa and not even know this was prairie before. So the signs, the communication, signaling that visually would be really important too. But we don't have a lot of time left. So let's open up to any comments from the audience about anything, the places we saw, the connections with Iowa, anything you'd like to bring up. Yes, sir?
Jim Throgmorton about replacing slums with housing developments. Any parallels between, say, bigger U.S. communities and dealing with homelessness and poverty and neighborhoods that have deteriorated in terms of how you involve the people that are being most affected, as opposed to just say, okay, new houses are coming for you.
You remember one slide I showed that I pointed out a woman sitting on her porch with the rest of us sitting around. Yeah, she exemplifies the ways in which individual residents of slums could become enabled to participate in the planning for the new structures that would be constructed. So Cost Forward actually is in the process right now of building some of these large new structures. And that they're pretty large scale facilities, but nonetheless, they are designed to enable people to move out of the, I'd call them shanty kind of towns that they currently are living in and have much better places to live. And to be involved in the process of designing those facilities and explaining what they need in terms of housing. That was very clear. And it's part of the process that Cost Forward uses when it's designing and building structures. And Cost Forward itself is an entity that is engaged in design and building, not simply in designing or simply in building, but designing and building and doing it in interaction with the future residents of the buildings. So, I think that is a key element, key theme that I learned from those folks.
Maybe more bottom-up planning than top-down for home housing.
Yeah. And a part of the whole process of deepening democracy, they take that very seriously. And it is way beyond what we experience here. And that's why I'm worried from a distance about technocratic ideas that are being promulgated by their urban planners, sort of importing ideas from the West and those two instances that I mentioned. But they're pretty confident they're going to be able to work through that tension between the technocratic concepts and deepening democracy.
Thank you.
I had a question, Jim, when you were talking about the urban renewal or building these buildings. I'm curious about what kinds of building materials they use, and what are they using other than electricity, or what is their source of energy? Is it strictly electric, and is it hydroelectric? What are they using? Wind? What are they doing? What kind of sustainable means are they using?
You remember all those classes we took at the Laurie Baker Center? The Laurie Baker Center has no windows. So the cooling comes from the design of the buildings and the materials that the buildings are constructed out of. And I didn't have time to explain it, but they have a whole set of principles involving using locally available materials and resources to construct whatever it is that's being designed, to involve the potential users in the design, and to weave the design of buildings into the landscape that they're set for. So in some cases, that landscape is urban, so the buildings have to be integrated into the urban society. In other cases, they're out in the woods, like the Laurie Baker Center was. They didn't tear any trees down. It was in a rubber tree area, So,
So natural ventilation and like natural local materials.
Yeah, mainly.
Yeah.
So just one more question following that. I guess I think of the population of India, which I think, did I read last week, could overtake China, but they really don't do censuses or whatever. So where you were, is that kind of a model, would you say, for the rest of India? I don't know how Kerala compares to the rest of India. That would be my question.
Well, I am certainly not an expert on India. I would never pretend to be. What I do know is what I heard, and what I heard was, yes, it is a model for how the rest of India should develop. But that's a political statement, isn't it? So you've got, I said, a leftist coalition, which has dominated politics in that country for quite a long time. So now they keep trying to do what they think they need to do, and then there's this other federal national government that's trying to push them in a different direction.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, there's a lot of models around the world, right, for high-density living at high sustainability. Singapore comes to mind, or the Netherlands, right? But it seems like Kerala, from what you're saying, is a model that may be better suited for tropical country in terms of climate, right? I would assume.
Yeah, you think the temperature is incredibly hot there, but it isn't, because it's surrounded on two sides, basically, by the Indian Ocean, by the Arabian Sea. And there are two monsoon seasons, I don't know, one in the spring, the other in the fall, whatever it is. And they move in two different directions. So a lot of the building design has to be conscious of that. But when we were there, from we were there from the end of December to the middle of January, basically. the average temperature was somewhere around 72 degrees during the day, high maybe 75. Average temperature at night, I don't know, 60. It was totally, it's really pleasant, sunny the whole time. We never got any rain at that time because it comes through in monsoons.
I'm new at this, but it occurs to me that, you mentioned that the landscape, the natural land in southern southwest India, as well as Costa Rica, is so beautiful, so lush, and they're doing so much to restore it. And Lucy mentioned, is it Lucy?
Yeah.
That are you overlooking the Neil Smith land in Prairie City, where a huge chunk of Iowa prairie grass has been reclaimed? Because we will never be southern India or Costa Rica, but we do have a lot going on in Iowa that I would think you would bring all these ideas right back home and say, let's do something with what we have rather than get too involved in what they're doing, which is just a little far removed. I mean, it seems like there's so much to be done right here in Iowa where local people can jump right in.
So the Neil Smith National Wildlife Preserve is a state park in Prairie City, so the largest state park we have with bison. We also have Kent Park right here with wonderful prairie restoration. Some of the prairie is about 25 years old, I think. It's very rich. And then we have a more recent one in town. The Ryerson Preserve is recently now a state forest, right? And around Cherry Trueblood, there's a prairie. So we have patches, right? But at the scale of the forest, protection, you see 50%. You said that is very hard to imagine the state going back to 50% in prairie, right? The scale of it is quite different. That being said, if you look at Western Europe, reforestation is happening too, not from effort from the government, because the land are really worthless in the foothills of the mountains, so Pyrenees, Alps. There's no city, there's about a sheep, right? It's not really worth to maintain agriculture, so the forest is actually naturally coming back down the hill in the Alps and the Pyrenees. So there's different ways reforestation can happen, right? Either because land is not really worth exploiting, or intentionally, like in Costa Rica. But we do have, think about it, 1% of, 0.1% of the original prairie in Iowa is still prairie. We've lost almost everything. So the scale of loss is going back to the colonial settlers farming the state is so much greater in Iowa.
In a course I taught 30 years ago, I asked students to investigate the viability of converting 40 square miles of eastern Iowa into tallgrass prairie, or reverting it to tallgrass prairie. It's only 20 miles by 20 miles. It's 400 square miles, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, got to do the math, so 400 square miles. And it was pretty fascinating to even think about it as a possibility. And if you kind of play that out, looking into the future, that creates the opportunity to do ecotourism in eastern Iowa, focusing on tallgrass prairie. Yeah. But then the Neil Smith Prairie Preserve was developed after that, and it's much smaller. But something like what we were trying to imagine 30 years ago could be done. Incorporate the Neil Smith area. It's entirely possible, but it's a matter of money, isn't it? And what's the cost of an acre of land?
And there's projects from the Yukon to Yellowstone, the idea of a major continental scale habitat that bison could roam again. I mean, there are quite a few people thinking about linking Kansas to Iowa all the way to Canada to get one major ecosystem scale. The thoughts are around. The practice, maybe not yet. But.
I just feel so much more comfortable getting involved locally than trying to say, what can I do in India now?
No, but we can learn. We can learn from what other countries have done, right? Yeah.
But here's where we do. You act locally.
Yep.
I just had a quick question for Mr. Olson. when you're talking about the reforestation up to 50-some percent in Costa Rica, do you know what type of trees and stuff were
Oh,
eliminated and then brought back?
I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what trees were replanted.
I can tell you what's still on the landscape. The Dole pineapple plantations
Yeah.
are still there. The oil, palm oil trees, all this goes to export.
Right.
So
I think the question was about the land that was reforested and reclaimed.
maybe corn, maybe I don't know, but those are still there. The export-oriented economies are still there.
Right.
Yeah. There's another question there. Oh, the lady right behind you. Sorry.
I just want to push the idea that we can plant native plants in our yards, in our backyards, in our public areas, everywhere, and we really need to.
Yeah. And small pockets actually in our backyards can actually help pollinators, birds. They may not help a fox or hedgehog, but it will help some species.
This is a question for Fat Jim. And this is a little off topic, but it just occurred to me. Did you hear anything much when you were in Costa Rica about it being invaded by Americans and people from other Western countries who moved there to live because it's so desirable? And it's causing problems in the country? They're being invaded?
No, I did not hear. So I don't speak Spanish, so they may have been saying that, or they may have been pointing at me and said he's an invader. But I didn't understand that. No, I didn't hear that. I did hear that great efforts are made actually to safeguard, protect the tourists and the retirees. That I'm not sure they're all viewed as invaders. They're viewed as a source of income. So tourism is 6% of the GDP. 200,000 people in Costa Rica are employed directly in serving the tourists. I didn't hear any hostility. What I did hear hostility about was the Nicaraguans. We noticed on one road that there was litter, and we said to the guide, well, why is there litter? And he said, well, it's the Nicaraguans. Yeah.
They have schools and degrees where they teach ecotourism actually to train guides that will then serve tourists and be good guides and know their species, know their flora and fauna. So I think it's a positive because it generates not only the economy but more education opportunities as well. It seems positive from what I've seen. Yeah.
We went to a really wonderful eco-tourist resort quite a long time ago when our kids were in high school, and they had actually reforested some of the farm that their parents had. They're still there. They're a German family, but we have some friends one couple live in New Mexico and the other live in Wyoming, and they became friends because they met in Costa Rica because they'd all moved down there, and both couples and another couple left after about 6 years, and we were saying, well, why did you leave? And they said because you could not leave your house alone for any period of time. I mean, probably to go to the store or something, but it was if they were, I guess, in a somewhat rural area, but because people would come in and steal things from them, and they're not, enormously wealthy people and all, but they said that the that people were outwardly friendly to them, but they were very involved in their families, and they were lonely there too. But also they felt that those families would go and steal from them. I mean, that's just a small group of people talking about things, but and I don't know what the rate of crime is anymore in Costa Rica.
There's a question over here. Here, Barbara.
Excuse me.
Hello, I want to talk about strategy. So one of the strategies mentioned is for Iowa to go with prairies. I thought that sounded good. So let's say you find a plot of land where a prairie could go. Then how do you make that happen? So for example, Oakdale campus, it's lawns all over the place. Kirkwood Community College has a huge, huge lawn. And, it seems to me that it could be all prairie, but how do you go about that?
So if the land is farmed currently, right, there's a conservation reserve program where farmers can be paid for planting prairie, and the contracts are, I think, 10 years, is that right? So it's not forever, and the farmer still maintains ownership of the land, but they will plant prairie for 10 years. There's land trusts that protect existing prairie that also replant. So, you can think of nonprofit or Nature Conservancy of Ducks Unlimited if you're in the northwestern part of Iowa. So there's nonprofits that do some of that work. Or you can imagine a city on its own public property, like our parks, turning land into prairie. The campuses and the taste for lawn, there's an aesthetic around lawn care. Like that, a lot of farmers, you drive around the state, you'll see a lot of farmers very meticulously mowing around their house. So we like lawn. That's a British taste for that very short grass landscape. It's not ecologically good, but there's an aesthetic or a taste that we all share in the Midwest that makes you a good neighbor, that makes you a good citizen, I think, to have a neat lawn, right? That seems much harder to, pass through or get over those aesthetic preferences, I think, that we share throughout the nation, I would say. But there are programs.
I think we need a persuasive vision about the future of this state. And by persuasive vision, I mean something that enables people to see a better way of life for all the people in this state, rather than simply growing the economy in a certain kind of way. Remember I said in Kerala that the focus was on human development and deepening democracy. But it was also about enabling all the people of that state to be able to participate in the process of imagining where they wanted their state to go, how they wanted it to develop. And I think we're not in that kind of situation now. So I think we need a persuasive vision backed up by a political will in order to move in that direction. Do I expect that to happen anytime soon? No, I do not. But I think that's what we need.
We also have a lot of young farmers who are trying to think differently about farming. If you go to the farmer's market, most of those who sell products are not commodity crops, and they're very critical of commodity crops. So I think they're all proposing an alternative vision of sort of the new age, neo-hippie farmer, right, with more diversified crops on their land. And they're proposing a different way of thinking about the land. That might be the beginning of a vision, although, compared to all the acreage in the state, that might be a very small minority, but it's there. I think it's a positive sign. Yeah.
I was just thinking that what you were talking about, trying to find prairie is got to be a huge challenge, because I just think, was it a couple years ago that ACT and Harvest Preserve did a land swap so they could build more houses on the one side of Harvest Preserve, and now I see that they're going to build another 60-some houses on Rochester Avenue on the other side of that preserve. So that preserve is just going to actually be surrounded by homes on all three sides. And, like I said, I guess I'm curious how something happens like that. Did you do a land swap like that? And then what ACT is going to probably do with that property on their side as well.
Yeah,
so.
We have a remnant on Napoleon Drive that's a pristine remnant. It's never been farmed, and development is coming all around it as well. That's true.
It's sad.
Yeah.
Quick question for both of you about sea level rise in both locations where you were. Concern, no concern, evidence that there's been change?
I did not hear any concern, and nor was I, am I trained to actually recognize change if it's occurring.
I didn't hear any concern about the seashore. I did hear a lot of concern about water management because the water's falling in places that differ from where it's needed. So that's why the irrigation projects become crucial there. Yeah. I wish I could have taken a photograph of them because it was really wonderful to see, but I felt like it was too intrusive, so I didn't do it.
Impressive and inspirational.
For sure.
Like countries that are low-lying, countries, atoll nations, Cook Islands, Fiji, those are the ones who are really hurting from sea level rise. There's enough height on both countries. I think that the coast is not really at risk.
I think in Kerala there is concern about climate change and what it might mean for the monsoons.
Yeah.
And instead of them being clearly predictable, that might be disrupted, and then who knows?
I'm thinking that we're out of time, and you all have asked great questions. Thank you very much. And I am charged with inviting you to join us in the Johnson County United Nations Association, where we care about all of these things. So we would love your support, and thank you for coming tonight.